Welcome to the afternoon session of the second day of Global Economic Zones Expo and Convention. This session will involve presentation by industry experts. I would like to invite on stage our moderator, Ms. Vineeta Hariharan, Public Policy and Mission Lead at the World Bank. A round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. I would now like to call upon our speakers and presenters on stage. Mr. Abhishek Chandra, IAS, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Shipping, Government of India. Mr. Mosttafa Shazzad, Project Head, Kishoregonj Economic Zone Limited and Chhatak Economic Zone Limited, and CFO, Nitol Steel Limited, Bangladesh. Please welcome Mr. A. Bipin Menon, Director of Foreign Trade at the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, New Delhi. And we have Mr. Chandranath Day, Head Industrial Consulting, JLL India, Logistics and its Impact on SEZ. I now invite Ms. Vineeta Hariharan to start the session.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think post-lunch we need to have a little bit of an invigorating session so everybody wakes up to the session. So we have an interesting array of speakers here from the public and the private sector. The public sector, we have people from the Ministry of Shipping and from the Ministry of Commerce. So we have a mix of both, he has an engagement with the private sector, is what I read from your profile, a deep engagement with the private sector, which is appreciable because the government having an empathy and an appreciation for the workings of the private sector is very, I think, welcome. And so we learn from his engagement perhaps with the private sector, sir, and from the free trade, he's worked extensively with the FTAs. So on my right, Mr. Abhishek Chandra, and welcoming Mr. Chandranath Day as well, who has extensive experience in the logistics sector in the country. And so we'll learn from you more about the logistics aspects of the SEZs, right? And of course, we have Mosttafa Shazzad. We have to give him a big hand. He's come all the way from Bangladesh. So we'll know about how we'll know about the success story of Bangladesh and how it has actually worked well in Bangladesh and perhaps vis-a-vis India, what are the learnings, So I think we can start with Mr. Abhishek Chandra, sir. I think you have to...
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, ma'am on the dais and distinguished speakers. First of all, I feel humbled that I've been invited here. I am representing the Secretary Shipping, and under his guidance, we've been able to take up a number of steps that are in the port development, port-led development. The program that I head is the Sagar Mala program. It's a $110 billion program in the government that we are doing. And one of the latest things that we are doing under Sagar Mala, one such program of the development is Chabahar Port. It is now under the Sagar Mala Development Company, which has taken over the operations and is also going to see how Chabahar Port is going to be a game changer for the future. So without much ado, I know there is a paucity of time, but I would welcome questions up, right and center because there's a lot to speak. And people on this side would love to speak only. So that is something which I feel may not be in the right interest of what you may like to take back while we are being here. So I would be very happy if you guys are going to question me. Chabahar, of course, is what I'm going to talk about, but anything beyond that also on port-led industrialization, especially in terms of SEZs, new smart cities that we are developing, and the CEZ, the coastal employment zones that we are doing through the Ministry of Shipping and Niti Aayog, I would be very happy to talk about in my deliberations that are there. Having said that, we keep hearing about Chabahar, what things are and how things are. Let me just tell you, Chabahar before the whole thing, a story that how it came in. It just happened one fine day that an advance information was there that US is going to move out the sanctions. Now, I'm speaking here with a kind of, just to get a correct, and telling you the kind of efforts that we had to do to make this thing happen. And while the US sanctions were being moved out, of course, they have been reimposed back with the Trump administration. It was under that at that point of time, India thought that why not to develop a port which would have a strategic linkage in Afghanistan and Central Asia. With that objective, we approached Iran telling them that we would like to build this port. And Chabahar has become a reality. Chabahar has been done by only 2 ports in our country. There is not a single rupee of the government of India expenditure that was done at the time when we had developed this. It was JNPT and Kandla that they came together, and through their funds, the Ministry of Shipping has taken such a big step, investing not only in a country, but also ensuring that we could see the sanctions of, at least they did not impact us, and we were able to have a strategic linkage over there. Now, where is this? This is a port which is in direct access to the Indian Ocean. It has it's connecting landlocked areas of the CIS, and about the east-north-south corridor, which I'll be talking about. Chabahar port has a lot of advantages, not only in terms of Central Asia, but also to the shipping lines, because it is absolutely in the middle of the place where it is established. I'll show you the location. It has abundant resources, both in terms of not just natural resource, but also fishes. And mineral resources are in large abundance. Of course, everybody knows about the oil, iron, ore, etc. Now, this is something which I would like you to just think about where and how how the locations are. Oh, let's say, sorry. So one, the north-south corridor, which is basically India, Russia, and the CIS, it's at the heart of that location. It's also connecting to the Europe from the southwest location, and you can see there are 3 map lines which I'll be deliberating more. 2 important routes. One is the Chabahar, Iran, Zahedan, and then Chabahar, Iran, Zahedan, Mahsad, Sarkaz. These are the routes which are connecting towards, one is going towards Turkmenistan, others going towards Afghanistan. Most of these construction activities are being done by India. Now, why is it so important? Obviously, it is because it has a distance of less than 1,000 nautical miles, which is within Bombay and Kandla. It has a reach which we can have in terms of our strategic depth. Both, I'll refrain myself to call in anything from the naval perspective or from the defense perspective. That's not the discussion here. But there is definitely a point to think about. So I'm not saying it. I'm not even mentioning it, that it is there as a counterweight against some country or any other country. That's not the objective of this discussion here. The objective is, on a strategic way, what and how are the locational advantage and how we can go about making our exports a viable option here. Now, here we have Chabahar-Zahedan highway, which we have already developed. This is being done through NH, and also some of it being done directly through our Ministry of Surface Road Transport, sister ministry in our case, because we both work together very strongly in Sagarmala. In fact, Sagarmala and Bharatmala are the 2 projects that are in lot of convergence that we are doing. One of the pillars of port connectivity is on the Bharatmala linked Sagarmala programs. Then there is a Zahedan, the Delaram linkage, which it goes straight into Afghanistan. Now, if you see why it is and how it's connecting Afghanistan, there is a circular garland highway of Afghanistan where it's going to link. And most of the districts, whether it's at Mazar Sharif, Herat, Kabul, all of them are going to get connected through Chabahar. So that is the kind of strategic depth we are getting in. Now, while on one side we have Afghanistan, on the other side it is also linking the Central Asia. The Central Asian republics, namely I would say Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, have huge amount of natural resources, be it the oil and gas, be it any other iron and many other minerals like granite and all. They're all there, and they have a problem of evacuation. For them, evacuation is a real challenge. So transportation by road vis-a-vis transportation by a road come sea route. Let me just give you some pointed numbers that we do under Sagarmala. Per ton per kilometer, if you see the movement of cargo in terms of logistic, per ton per kilometer movement on road is around 3 rupees today in India. The same thing, if you do it through a coastal route or an inland route, it comes to 30 paise. So if you see the difference, it's almost 10% of the cost. So while we talk about the Belt Road Initiative, we talk about other strategic investments being done by major countries around, nobody can beat the sea option in terms of costing, in terms of pure logistic costs. So there is no brainer. I mean, I may spend a huge amount of infrastructure cost in developing a land-based evacuation, but the sea route will always score over the land route. And in this case, we have a definite advantage, is why we had come here. Now, Chabahar will connect Afghanistan, which is what I have already told you. It will be connecting Turkmenistan on the eastern border. And if you see it, the distance is not much. And the Sarakhas border, which is basically the border of Iran, Afghanistan with Turkmenistan, there lies the challenge next. It's not just strategic, but also economic. It has, of course, a geostrategic importance, and the reason is because there is a port that is being funded by China in Pakistan, Gwadar port. But as I said, I have only one slide here without much importance attached to this. Standalone, this is a project which is going to reap rich dividends, not only to the investor, but also to the people who are taking the lead to invest in Iran. Now, why will it be there? Let me just tell you here that Chabahar port, for whatever reasons, I mean, US has imposed sanctions on Iran, but not imposed sanctions on the free trade zone. Now here, just see this. You have a free trade zone in a country, there is no sanction on that. You can operate in that free trade zone, which is being operated largely by India. There is no sanction on that area. But the rest of Iran has all under sanctions. Okay? So this is the kind of thinking that we had through Ministry of Shipping to ensure that the investors are protected. Two, we have a definite advantage while we are putting in there for a long-term investment. And that is where I say that these are the projects that they get exempted. Now, if anybody who comes in, any investor who comes in, the kind of investing role that is there, I'll be talking about, they would reap rich dividends, because even the markets in Iran, if you need to supply through the free trade zone, would be advantageous. So one way is an import, the other way is exports to that area. Like wheat, we have just recently done, has been a win-win situation. Now something about Chabahar. Chabahar port has two ports, namely the Bahesti and the Kalantri port. Presently, there are 5 berths. Shahid Bahesti port, which has a capacity of around 2.5 million tons, has a deep draft of around 14 meters. And phase 1 of approximately 8 mm TPA has already been completed. Chabahar presently handles approximately 0.2 MTPA, which is around 0.4% of the total cargo handled by Iran port, because it's relatively new compared to Bandar Abbas. But it is bound to be very high in times to come. 45% of the total cargo will be dominated by oil. The rest, 50%, they would be a transit cargo, or they may be a combination which may be going towards Central Asia. Last and not the least, it is within the Chabahar port, 60% of the area, the second part is being operated directly by Iran. The main port, the Bahesti port, 60% of that is with India's operation. Now, the transshipment in Afghanistan, recently we have shipped approximately 1.1 lakh tons of wheat through this port, where we had a good relation with Central Asian countries to allow us to supply the necessary material to Afghanistan in the times of need. The potential which is there in terms of other commodities, which I'm just going to talk about, is approximately 28%. Year on year, we have mapped this till 2028 with a select bit of commodities which we have done. The development that we have taken up are that we have developed 2 berths, which I've just told you. We have reclaimed the areas. Then we have constructed 3 container berths. By the year 2020, we would be constructing another 3 container berths. But the year 2020, they would be multi-purpose other berths, including oil berth, which will be completed by 2024. This is where we are talking about a regional connectivity. I, on purpose, have not shown the BRI road initiative, which is very, very similar to what we are doing, but much, much more competitive. These are some of the developments, some of the milestones that we have done over the last few years to ensure that it becomes a reality. Sagarmala Development Company has taken over the operations of IPGL, Indian Ports Global Limited, a company that was formed by Kandla Port and JNPT, is now with Sagarmala. So while the seeds were laid, Sagarmala has finally taken over and is now taking it in its stride. Sorry. To just tell you some of the things that are there, we have already invested close to 85 billion, 85.21 million USD, and approximately 150 million USD from Exim Bank is already there with us for the further investments in Chabahar. What are the projects that we are doing? So infrastructure projects, of course, immediately that come to my mind are the rail corridor projects that we are developing there, the road projects that we are subletting there. IRCON is subletting these on different bases to their vendors, both internationally and nationally, for the construction of the railway lines. We are also developing the free trade zone of approximately 14,000 hectares. Now, there would be 100% capital and profit repatriation allowed over here for almost 20 years, which is amazing. There would be duty exemptions on the raw material, and that's why I say that there is a huge opportunity which would be here. Investment in petrochemical complex. We just did a quick math and we found out that a project cost of 12 billion would give you an annual return of approximately 14 billion. So this is the kind of things that are there just because Kandla, India is going to be an oil importing nation in any case. So it would be requiring the fuel supply arrangements on long-term basis, and this is one such arrangement. Downstream industries also have a huge advantage, which means even transportation or even packaging. There are various kind of industries. I would just touch over here. The two main complexes that we have immediately are a tourist town which we are trying to develop there, a steel plant where 300 hectares of land has been demarcated. Some of the other potential industries are the gas networking industries, automotive hub, the petrochemical hub which I have spoken, the aquaculture hub, fertilizer unit. I mean, I didn't put it here, but fertilizer has a big spin-off because of the abundance of gas that is found there. Fertilizer in Iran has been the second largest reserve of gas, but fertilizers from that place, if you see, making a fertilizer in Iran and bringing it to Kandla is far more cheaper than bringing the gas in India and making a petrochemical fertilizer plant here. The reason is that the transportation of gas and other things is a cost which one has to bear. So that's the reason why I say this. There are numbers which are there to show what would be the kind of advantage for fertilizer potential that can be developed. Similarly, petrochemical complex, which is I have spoken about, and it has a proven oil reserve, which it's not sharing right now, but it will eventually because of the kind of investments that we are doing. Then mineral processing, especially in terms of gypsum, iron, copper, there is a huge advantage that we can look at. And the auto hub, there is 400 hectares of land where they are looking at manufacturing it from Chabahar. That's all I would put in here. I don't know if I have taken a lot of time, but I just cut short. I had many more backup slides, but I leave it at this point. Thank you so much for your time.
So I think he has to leave now, so we could take some questions.
Yeah,
from
I can
the
take some
audience.
questions, but I can stay for another 10 minutes if you're okay. If there are some questions, I would be very happy answering. See, in Chabahar alone, it's not just Chabahar which is required. It's not just one port. If you see Chabahar as such, now we're getting other nations also to come in. So the next step is, how do you get other nations also to be a part of this whole growth story? Iran has been a difficult customer for us. Let me tell you this while negotiating. They extracted their pound of flesh. We wanted the entire area to be developed as such, but they've given us almost like 60-40 kind of a thing. But we will make it maximum as such, whatever we get in. There are a lot of advantages, not just in terms of an oil reserve which is there, but the the SEZ or the free trade zone will supply the material to the countries there. So when you see it, there is a huge game-changing aspects of not just in these industries. These are the industries, sorry ma'am. Okay. So these are the industries that we are looking at, which we have done small study for the products that we were told. But we will be very happy to do it on your behalf through Sagarmala Development Company. Let me just stop here and tell you about Sagarmala Development Company. It's a company which has a 100% stake by the Ministry of Shipping. We invest in anything that requires connectivity, investment in port, logistics with the government or the private sector. Up to 49% of the equity we can take with any private entity also. We have no problem investing. We can raise resources much better than any other company because our earnings are in dollars and our outflows in dollars. Most of our earnings, say for JNPT, if you have to go in, you have to put an indent in dollars and it has to come back in dollars. So there is no hedging cost. Now you can understand if I have no hedging cost, what's the cost of capital? So for me, raising resources is easier than for any other private entity raising the same kind of resources. So standalone, of course, oh, thank you so much, madam. Standalone, of course, we will do our own due diligence. We will do our own mathematical calculations in terms of IRR, NPV. We will see what best can be there. But up to 49% we can invest. And that, unfortunately or fortunately, only very few players in India have been doing it. Like Krishnapatnam Port, we are investing with a private entity for a railway line. Imagine. A railway line we are developing, dedicated railway line because the railways was not able to complete that project in time. So we said, okay, we invest. So that is the kind of things where you guys can come in areas where you feel that there is a competitiveness. We come in there with you. Why 49%? Because we don't want to be an owner of your project. We still believe that it is a partnership and government can be a helping hand. So that's how Sagarmala Development Company in its note has said that we will not go beyond 49%. Thank you.
Right.
There's no bar. We are doing 150 megawatt of solar projects on our ports. 71 megawatt has already been completed. So we have not come across any solar based project asking for funds because there's another ministry, MNRE, looking at it. But on our own also we are doing 150 megawatt of solar projects in our country.
Mr. Chandra, hi. I'm Ranganathan from Reliance.
Yeah.
Just one question, sir. You did mention that the Chabahar free zone is not come under the US sanctions. But what about the supply of raw materials from Iran to the zone and from the zone to the Iranian market? How that work out?
Yeah,
Would that also be exempted?
Yeah, at this stage it is. At this stage it is. Later on, if there is something that comes in or somebody else says that no, this should not have been there, it is circumventing some route, it's not making sense, that's a separate issue. But at this stage it is. So your principals who were there came to our ministry just for information, and along with Adani, there was another group that was there, and they were looking at a fertilizer unit being established there, and including the Sikka port. Basically, you have one port on Gujarat side where the petrochemical complex is there. So that's how they were in advanced talks with us. But then let the companies decide. I mean, I leave it. We can only facilitate up to a point.
My name is Naresh Sagar.
Sir.
My question is that you are developing a port
Sir.
for government to government basis. How far you have been able to induct? Because unless and until the private sector is inducted, either by shipping or either by any sources, because Central Asia is not a big market. You can import something, raw material from there, but you have to send the finished goods from here. The people who are manufacturing the finished goods, I'm not talking of Adani or, Reliance.
Sir, I get it.
We have to have the passengers, cargo, and other ship industry to be more active. Unless and until those are active, you cannot go. Afghanistan is not a place where a tourist can go or an industrialist can go. How far you are making it viable for other industry to rope in?
So as I said in my presentation, that the entire thing is to ensure that the downstream industries and also private sector is inducted. Sagarmala Development Company is a company, it's not the government. It is a company under the Companies Act. And we are partnering with the private sector. So if you feel that there is something that is encouraging, like an SCI, we dedicated ships, a liner on a daily basis, we can requisition and tell them to operate. But do you think that that business is there for it to go daily? So, no sir, it is the industry which says that. Let me just rephrase that question to you. You tell us that there is a requirement that is there for a logistic support that is required and we come in. I am putting it other way around. For the industries that I have done the studies, I have done that. The government can't spoon feed. It has to be done by the industry. If suppose you have your consultants who say that there is beyond wheat, there is beyond granite, there is beyond petrochemical, there is beyond a fertilizer industry, some other industry which can come in there, like an auto hub, which we realized it, we will support it. Tell us the kind of support you need.
This is what I want you to understand, that unless and until there is some incentives to the industrialists to send the finished good to those countries, which can be Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and they...
Sir, it is there. 100% is there in that area of FTA, but from India it will not come.
And then you have told us that we have got good relations with America, and they have allowed us to have some trade with Iran. But lately, about a month back, we have shifted the oil purchasing. Most of the oil we were purchasing from Iran has been shifted to other countries to please America. So those are some hidden problems. There also the business becomes lesser in extent. How far you can give incentives so that the industry as a whole can go along and make a mark in Central Asia. This is what I want to ask.
I think it's a larger issue
I
beyond
think it is
beyond the scope of his
debate.
Chabar port, etc. So, so I think it was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
An eye opener, in fact. So, and how it contributes to economy in future, we'll have to see. So. If I may just ask, how are the environmental risks being mitigated here? Because I think it's a port project, and are you facing that challenge, or okay? It's working.
So it was basically in a country which was there that they had to get the clearances.
Right.
And not in our country. In our country, it would be the Ministry of Environment and Forest, which is the nodal ministry here. So there in their ministry, of course, they had put all those clearances. So here we didn't have it because it was not, the territorial jurisdiction is of Iran. And they put all those clearances before we entered. We had a checklist for them that we would require this kind of dredging works, or this is the kind of environmental waterfront that we would want. And we have done that. We have got it from them. So, and an MOU, of course, it was bilateral.
Sure. Thank you very much. So,
thank you, Mr. Abhishek Chandra, for such an interactive presentation. I would like to invite our moderator, Ms. Vineeta Hariharan, to give a small token of our appreciation to Mr. Abhishek Chandra.
so I think we'll move on to Bangladesh now. Mr. Mosttafa Shazzad. Be presenting a paper on the economic SEZs in Bangladesh in general. So, Bangladesh is still a nascent stage, but yet rising fast in terms of SEZs. So we could perhaps get cues from their policies and
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very delighted to present here today before such a nice audience. I would like to present here within my allocated 15 minutes time, as I know. I would like to speak on concurrent development of economic zone in Bangladesh, and also I will try to share our experience to develop private economic zone in Bangladesh. Few words on my two private economic zone where I am working as project head. So let's move on my paper, Economic Zone in Bangladesh, a story of transformation. You know, our Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, just carrying the dream of our Father of Nations, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And under his eminent leadership, we are now growing ourselves, and our present GDP growth is 7.86%. And we are expecting GDP growth in next year in 8.5%. I think that's a problem in this slide. Our Prime Minister working to reach a big dream, middle income country by 2021 and a developed country by 2041. And I'm delighted to share you, we are actually moving towards this dream. To hit this target, our Prime Minister would like to establish 100 economic zone by 2030. These zones may be in the form of government-owned, private, and some is government-to-government, means G2G. In these zones, 10 million job will create, we expect, and we expecting we will get a incremental export of 40 billion from these economic zones. Now, let's have a look how our economic zones are operating in Bangladesh. You know, our government agency for economic zone development and monitoring is the Bangladesh Economic Zone Authority. We call it BEZA. Prime Minister working as the chief of this body. He is the headed governing body of BEZA. And a functional executive board also were there, and presently Mr. Pawan Choudhury, a full-fledged Secretary of Government Republic of Bangladesh, is working as executive chairman of this board. And you know, it is a very strong and very proactive agency of Bangladesh that we have ever seen in Bangladesh bureaucratic environment. Main objective of BEZA, Bangladesh Economic Zone Authority, we can figure out as follows. First of thing, making bigger our export by attracting foreign direct investment, to achieve a social and environmental excellence that will finally help us to achieve our sustainable development goal, SDG. And main function of this agency, establishing government-owned economic zone and zone under G2G arrangement. But we are still in doubt whether these government and G2G zones are threat to develop private economic zone in Bangladesh or not. Another function of this agency is licensing to private economic zone. Absolutely, this is also a contradiction about establishing government economic zone, government-owned economic zone, as well as providing license to private economic zone by same authority. It's also a matter of debate. BEZA also registered unit investors. Investors, those are like to establish their industry or factory in the zone. And BEZA regulating and monitoring all zones, developers, as well as unit investors. BEZA also confirming OSS facilities, one-stop service facilities to investors and zone developers also. You know, we have various fiscal and non-fiscal incentive for zone developers as well as for unit investors. Like that, 12 years progressive tax holiday for zone developers, 10 years tax holiday for investors. And there are some scope of duty-free import of raw materials and many incentive. For more details, I have a brochure in my hand. You can collect it from me to know details about our economic zone incentives. In Bangladesh, we are developing different type of economic zone, considering equity pattern and specialization. Like that, private partnership project economic zone, government to government economic zone, private economic zone, private entrepreneurship, they are working on it. A special economic zone, like economic zone for information technology, economic zone for tourism. Like that, our Sabrang and NAF economic zone specially established for tourism purpose. And it is a new dimension of economic zone, I think I would like to share here. These two economic zones is very close to Myanmar border and connected with our coastal area. Some economic zone in Bangladesh established by other government. Like that, in Bangladesh, we have Indian economic zone, we have China economic zone, we have Korean economic zone in Bangladesh. And some economic zone absolutely owned by GEZ itself. These are government and some are semi-governmental status. We are very new in economic zone concept. We have gazetted our law for establishment of economic zone in the year of 2010. So it's just a 9 years journey of economic zone in Bangladesh. Till date, we have awarded 11 numbers of economic zone in Bangladesh. We have 2 layers of license in Bangladesh. First one is the pre-qualification license. It is just a conditional license to the developer. And after fulfillment of such conditions, authority issue the final license. Till date, we have awarded only 11 number of final license, and we have created 21,500 employment till date, and investment of 3.1 billion. And we are also exporting to Japan, Canada, Europe, India, China from our private economic zone. Now come some challenges we are facing to establishing and operating private economic zone in Bangladesh. I have mentioned our group, Nitol Group. Nitol Group is a company associated with Tata Motors in India. We are 30 years business bonding with Tata, and we are sole distributor of Tata vehicle in Bangladesh. We are establishing 2 economic zones. One is the Kishoregonj economic zone, and another is the Chhatak economic zone. Both economic zones are connected with rail line. We have our own rail connectivity with national line, and we have river connectivity also, being it's very immediate vicinity of some river connectivity. In this occasion, I would like to share our journey to establish economic zone in Bangladesh and challenges to run this private economic zone as we are facing now as a new entrance in this segment. Our journey to establish economic zone started with our friend and development partner we always acknowledge is India. We have a long history of friendship and collaboration with India. Same thing is happened in my zone also. We have got a team of PwC India. They have conducted our feasibility study to cover sector analysis, to cover social and economical study, revenue mapping, cost analysis, financials, and ratio analysis, support for getting fund, as well as support for getting investors in our zone. Mahindra Construction has done our master plan for zone development. Mahindra Construction have their own zone in India also, as I know. They also provide us the utility drawing and the 3D presentation of our zone. We have conducted our environmental study twice. Once for getting the license according to the guidelines of Bangladesh Economic Zone Authority. And another environmental study we have to conduct for getting international fund or foreign fund for establishing zone. There's also guidelines of World Bank through our central bank, Bangladesh Bank. You know, we are enjoying facilities of finance from World Bank. It is investment promotion and financing facilities. It is phase 2. There are two types of rate over there. One is the variable rate, one is the fixed national rate. And these rates are related with the LIBOR rate as well as the government treasury bill in Bangladesh. And tenure of the loan is 3 plus 15, 3 years grace period, 18 years. Usually in our country, loan for project finance, highest 3 plus 5 is 8 years. And IDLC, the biggest non-banking financial institution in Bangladesh, working as our finance partner. They are dealing with our fund and collaboration with World Bank and financing agencies. In spite of having some success story, we are still facing a good number of challenges to establish and operating private economic zone in Bangladesh. First of all, rank of ease of doing business. You know, we are in rank 176. India ranked 77 over there out of 119 countries. And we are trying to improve ourselves, and BEZ are trying to support investors as well as developers by their one-stop service facilities, OSS. And you know, there is no dedicated fund for long-term finance in economic zone. We are enjoying the facilities for World Bank, but actually this fund established for infrastructure, not especially for economic zone. This fund used widely in the power sector. So it is the first time we are planning, we are in arrangement to get this finance from World Bank for economic zone establishment. You know, interest rate of such loan is not so suitable for economic zone, being margin of economic zone is very slim. You know, you all are operator and investor over there. And number of incentives that provided our government for economic zone and investors not so attractive. And I have mentioned that some economic zone owned by government and some by government to government. These also threats for private economic zones, being investors' numbers is very limited, and there is very competition over there. And you know, there are some lack of coordination between the government, various government agencies in terms of like getting connection for getting support from government agencies, being we have a very long history of bureaucratic legislative constraint in our country. And finally, is political unrest. These are challenges. So this end from my side. Finally, I would like to I like reported my thanks to all to have hear me with patience. Thank you all again, and best wishes for our long-lived friendship. Thank you all. Goodbye, namaskar, assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Mosttafa. So quite interesting, brief, but it gave us a good glimpse of what's happening in Bangladesh in terms of the SEZ scenario. We'll ask the questions at the end of this, and we'll move to Mr. Bipin Menon.
Yeah, good afternoon to you all. So I'm working in the Department of Commerce, not directly related to the SEZs per se, but on the free trade agreements, which I presume is a good ancillary for you to really take advantage of your presence in the SEZs and look at exports to various markets. So I was quite impressed by Mr. Chandra's presentation on the Chabahar port, and the way I saw the infrastructure panning out there. There are two important aspects which I'll really look at from the perspective of FTAs. We are in the process of negotiating an FTA with Iran. If all of you are aware, we had a delegation going to Iran just this month, and we are in the process of having I wouldn't say a full-fledged FTA, but a preferential trade agreement with them, which is an opportunity for you to also look at Chabahar there in terms of how you pan out your exports to India, and probably also sourcing of raw materials into the Chabahar port in Iran itself. We already have an existing agreement with Afghanistan, which also gives you an opportunity to leverage your presence in Chabahar and probably look at exports into Afghanistan through this particular route. We are negotiating also with the EAEU, which is the Eurasian Economic Union, which is a conglomeration of 3 or 4 countries in the CIS region, including Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Belarus. You have an opportunity also to look at that particular option when you are seeing the Chabahar port. As far as the EU is concerned, the European Union, well, there's some way off there because we have the Brexit that's come in and that's put somewhat of a spanner in the entire negotiations, at this point of time. So just to pick on the Chabahar port opportunities as we look at negotiations ahead. Coming to the slide, if you see, there's been a proliferation of FTAs despite the fact that the WTO has been entrenching the multilateral trade negotiations around the world. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry is virtually now entering into FTAs. And with Mongolia being one of the only WTO members that did not have an FTA, they signed an FTA with Japan, and finally we have each and every WTO member which is part of one FTA or the other. There are countries like Chile which have almost 28 or 29 FTAs, and there are some countries which have only one FTA. India has also joined the bandwagon. There's a clarion call as to the FTAs undermining the multilateral trade system. But I guess at the end of the day, it's about complementing the system itself, because if you have an opportunity with a particular trading partner, and the way the multilateral negotiations have really petered out in the entire context over the last 10 to 12 years, everybody will actually jump at an opportunity to have a trade agreement with their trading partner. So we've also joined the bandwagon, and we are here to stay and hopefully go ahead with some of the FTAs with some of the trading partners based on inputs by a number of stakeholders back home. What's the rationale for our FTAs? It's not rocket science at all. It's just that we're trying to explore various export markets. And in the current scenario where you have a proliferation of FTAs around the world, a small example that some stakeholders have told us was that when we are trying to export to a particular country, we find that our competitors have market access into the same very market at zero duty, and we are unable to compete with them. In such a scenario, when you have an export orientation, it's inevitable that you'll get into FTAs, of course in a measured and a calibrated manner, so that you also have some sort of modicum of protection for your domestic industry. So the diversification has been one of the primary points for us to get into FTAs. We're also looking at access of raw materials, intermediates, and capital goods. A classic example is the India-Korea FTA, where the Koreans, before negotiating the FTA, during the negotiations of the FTA, looked at market access for the auto components because they were planning to put in a huge automotive manufacturing in India. Companies like Hyundai were interested in doing some manufacturing and setting up auto hubs here. It was a win-win situation for both countries because investments came in, we had exports happening from our side, and the Koreans were supplying raw materials to us through the FTA itself. Foreign investment is, of course, one of the primary issues as far as FTAs are concerned, because unless you have clarity about the investments that are happening all around the world, including, for example, Bangladesh, if people are investing a lot in Bangladesh now, apart from the economic zones coming in, so how do you leverage FTAs to really have a win-win situation for both the trading partners? India's policy till now has been a look east policy or an act east policy, where we have confined ourselves to the areas in the eastern part of the world, especially the Eastern Asian region. But now we are trying to spread our wings even into Latin America, looking at Africa, for example, through some countries, and even looking at, Europe. EU, of course, I would say in a way is become on a back burner right now, but we'll pick it up in due course. We have, fortunately or unfortunately, had a very guarded approach to FTAs. If you look at many of our FTAs, they're probably one of the most conservative FTAs in the world today. And that's put us in a somewhat of a bind, I would say, because at the end of the day, if you're looking at market access, you need to have an FTA that has a reasonable level of ambition in order to get into those markets. If your primary purpose is to protect your domestic industry, of course, that has a drawback in terms of looking at FTAs. So we have to have a clear calibrated policy in terms of whether exports is our thrust, and how do we balance this export thrust with our domestic manufacturing imperatives that we have back home. So it's important to have a middle path now, and the new thinking that we have in the bureaucracy and the political establishment is that we need to have this calibrated approach and look at expanding our footprints across the world and giving us opportunities to expand. Services has been one of our core strengths, and we have been trying to negotiate on services, but as you know, services also has a political dimension to it, issues such as immigration and movement of natural persons. So the headway has not been very stark there. So at the end of the day, I guess it's about goods and how we can get the best deal out of our trading partners on goods. All of you know this, I mean, this is all in the public domain. We have around 16 FTAs now, 10 free trade agreements and 6 preferential trade agreements. The most ambitious being the one with Japan. The most conservative one, I would say, right now is with some countries like Chile, Mercosur, and even the GSTP, which is a very watered-down agreement. So it's been a mixed picture for us as far as ambition goes. But I guess the new paradigm in FTAs that's now coming up is that we need to expand and really have reasonable level of ambitions with various trading partners. This is a geographical spread. You might be befooled to see that some of the African countries are also part of it, but that's because they were part of the GSTP, which is obviously a very watered-down agreement. But we really haven't got a footprint into some of these continents like Africa and even in North America. The most active FTAs that we have right now are the ones with Peru, which is in serial number 4, with Iran, which is serial number 10, with Mauritius, which is in serial number 2, and finally the mother of all FTAs, which is in serial number 12, which is the RCEP, or the 16-country FTA that we are negotiating with a number of countries, including China. So that's the basic state of play as far as the FTAs is concerned. I just picked up some preferential import data that we get from DGCIS. If you look at the preferential import data from many of the FTAs, it's only around 10 to 40% or around 48% of our total imports happen through the FTAs as of now. But this trend is growing. Some of the reasons could be that the rules of origin are very, I would say, constraining. The others could be that the staging periods are still kicking in many of the FTAs. So this is the import utilization, which still stands at around 50% or so, the highest being for Korea. And if you see preferential in terms of the sectoral coverage, it's basically areas like organic chemicals, iron and steel, where the utilization rates are the maximum with some of our trading partners. Obviously, Japan and Korea are supplying a lot of iron and steel products to us in this particular section. So finally, I just come to an overall conclusion. If you look at the trade data as such, our imports have grown, our exports have grown, our trade deficit has also marginally increased. But at the end of the day, the fact remains that there has been a robust growth in trade as far as FTAs is concerned. There's also been the fact that we need to sensitize most of our stakeholders back home, including the ones in the SEZs, to really take advantage of that. The Commerce Ministry does undertake some outreaches, but we don't undertake specifically on SEZs, the units within the SEZs. That's something we might change in the near future. But I guess at the end of the day, it's important to look at how we can leverage FTAs to really enhance exports in our country. So thank you for your patient hearing, and I'm open to questions at the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Menon. I think it was a good glimpse of what FTAs are and how they are impacting the economy. I think perhaps the only point of concern was the number of FTAs, which is only 10 till now. So why we'll probably discuss after this session. So we'll go to Mr. Day. We'll have a talk by Mr. Chandranath Day, who's talking about logistics and how they impact the SEZs.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'm humbled by the presence of such stalwarts in the sector. I'm not a SEZ guy. You guys know it better than probably the most of the country. I'm here to talk about primarily something which is happening outside the SEZ. The connection, the logistics which connects these SEZs, and how does it have an impact on the sector. So I'll run you through first a bit about logistics, because India is currently going through a big change in the logistic domain itself, and then I'll have a brief look on the impact of the logistic on the SEZ domain. So the state of logistics in India. We have been in a segment where there has been godowns, warehouses, segments which were very rudimentary as such, but now we have the segment growing and consolidation after GST coming in, and the sector is growing significantly at the rate of around 20% post GST. And in the next 4 years, it is expected to double itself. These are numbers for 8 cities that we, in JLL we track, almost double its number in the next 4 years. How does we stand in comparison with global US and all? So Indian logistics stock is just around 1/3 of the commercial stock, or warehousing stock is 1/3 the commercial stock. Compare it with US, it's almost 3 times the commercial stock. So there's a 10x potential of growth in this segment. From the demand side, in the sense the absorptions in the sector has been growing significantly over the last 4 years. Post GST, if you see, the growth is growing, the absorption is growing at the rate of 63% in the last year. So 32 million square feet absorbed in 8 cities in the last 4 years, last year as such. And the vacancies in the warehouses has now gone down to less than 10% level. More importantly, it's more about compliant spaces, grade A spaces which are comparable to international standards as such, or which are coming up in the segment, is more becoming more and more important to tenants and all. Interestingly, I met some of the users of e-commerce and 3PL in the last few years. So what I came to know that the growth that they're experiencing now is almost the same which they had done in the last 12 years. So that's the kind of growth that we have in the logistics sector. The demand is so strong as such. Just a global perspective on this front, also in the commercial spectrum, it's somewhat similar to the commercial absorption in the country at this point in time. From a global perspective, so if you're talking about 32 million square feet in last year, we are actually, US was 260 million square feet in 2018. So that's the quantum of absorption of demand in US. And I also tried to understand what is the per person absorption, so that the demand per person comes out. We stand at just around 0.2 square feet per person as the absorption, as compared to a US and Australia, which is around 1. So there's a 50x opportunity of growth in the absorption segment. So having given some idea about the logistics and the sector growth perspectives, I'll go to the more specific about logistics and the SEZ equation. For that, I have tried to decipher the logistic pie. So if we are spending 100 rupees on logistics, typically we are spending 45% on the transportation. Rest of all, it's around warehousing, customer service, packaging, labor handling costs, and inventories. The biggest pie, the most important pie, which is also impacting the entire manufacturing domain, is the transportation part. And how do we do it? Through 4 major modes. As Mr. Chandra earlier highlighted, that probably ships are the most cheapest mode of transport. I've tried to give an idea about the modal split that India has in terms of the different modes like ship, rail, road, and air. It is interesting that the biggest share that India has is on road, which is around 57%, lion's share. And probably shipping is just around 6%. There's a lot of efforts from the government which we see recently on the infrastructure domain to boost this segment, like a Sagarmala project, the inland waterway projects, etc. India is spending around 12% of its GDP on the infrastructure as compared to other developed nations, which is around 6 to 8, 9%. So the backbone is being set for the development of the project. The most efficient mode of transport, shipping, but most underutilized or undercovered at this point in time. Air, if we neglect air at this point in time, because we are talking about SEZs and its connectivity to SEZs, it's more important is to how you get things manufactured in your SEZs to places outside country. Probably two modes of transport that will probably be more important would be the air and the shipping. So we tried to analyze the SEZs in India and find out what percentage of that SEZs is manufacturing and what percent is non-manufacturing or services. Service industry is typically a very different segment. It's under an SEZ, but it's a specialized commodity. It's like an office space. So the requirements are different. The logistic requirements are not that much. But if we just focus on the red component, the manufacturing SEZs, we're talking about 68 SEZs, which are around 32% by numbers and around 87% by area. So that's the volume of people, of the manufacturing SEZ that we have. It's around 50% of all exports in that area. Now, how are these SEZs featuring in terms of the logistic modal connectivity? The modes that we identified, we try to understand what are the average distance of these manufacturing SEZs to the nearest national highway or the rail connectivity, average airport connectivity, and port connectivity. So we did analyze the 68 manufacturing SEZs and their connections to the nearest transport nodes. You will be surprised that national highway, there's still a 9-kilometer gap. So that's mean the last mile connectivity is still missing, probably. Railways, 16-kilometer away. Airways, even if we ignore that component of the mode. What's more important is around 216 kilometers is the nearest port. So the connectivity to the port, which is probably the only major mode where you can ship your goods or export your goods, is almost 200 kilometers away from the port. So is this 200 kilometers small or large? So we take some global we'll take the global examples at a later point in time in the next slides. But then we also analyze the size of the SEZs. So how does it matter? The sizes of the SEZs of the 68 SEZs that we talked about, almost 50 of them ranges between 0 to 1,000 acres. And only one SEZ is 5,000 acre plus. We're talking about SEZs leaving out the EOUs, which were earlier highlighted. The average size, 919 acres of SEZ size is what we're talking about. Is this good enough for servicing the economics of the scale for the projects? Is it good enough to service or get it connected to the rail and the road? So we take some international examples to see what it is. So 4 cases as such, mostly all major successful SEZs has been port-based. In terms of Sohar Port, free zone, 12,000 acres. Next to Sohar Port, multiple developments as such. I was fortunate to work in that project also in some point in time. So there's around multiple industries which are operational over there, specializing on the chemical and petrochemical segment. Jebel Ali free zone is again one of the most popular free zones that we have, and that's again along the Jebel Ali port in Dubai. One of the biggest success stories, trade worth around $87.6 billion. Shenzhen, 80,000 acres. Next to port of Shenzhen, 3 million registered businesses in 2017. So Chao Lai is Vietnam. It's again one of the greenfield port, and you won't believe they are optimizing the port. The turnaround time in port in Vietnam in these are so great that they're comparing it right now with Singapore or other major ports in the country, in the world. Approximately positioning is the national coastal corridors. What's important to note in all these cases, all these locations are ideally connected through either 3 or 4 modes of transport: shipping, rail, road, and airways. So shipping is the mandatory must almost for all major aspects. So connected through ports is something which we have seen over the cases. So is it only a fiscal incentive territory where we can get some incentives? Exactly not. In most of the cases, it's a city. Cities actually seldom have SEZs. SEZs become a city. That's the example that we have seen in the global cases. For example, in the case of Shenzhen or in Jebel Ali as such. So the economics of scale should be such that it can attract, and the social economic facilities like hotels, hospitals, roadways becomes viable in that cases. So scale does matter. Logistics connectivity, of course I mentioned the 4 logistics connectivity that we are talking about. That's more important to put it across in terms of the raw materials coming into the SEZs and the finished goods exported out of the SEZs as such. Economic destination creation, that's the most important aspects that we probably have in an SEZ aspect. So now I'll take a kind of a detour in terms of the presentation to give you the specialized SEZ, the FTWZ story. It's a logistics SEZ. So 2 slides on this, just to say that this is probably the most promising segment in the logistics domain as such at this point in time, but also the most neglected because of certain regulatory aspects. Most of the people consider the FTWZ's rentals are higher, so rental we saw it's around 10%. Even if it is 50% higher, it will not be that much a problem. I have a later slide where I have taken a sample case of a commodity and find out the price and or the delta that a exporter can get or importer can get out of that being operational out of an SEZ. SEZs offer facilities on, as compared to a bonded facility, long-term benefits. You can break bulk it, you can partial sell, you can also showcase, you can have a showroom inside the warehouse. You can have your customers inside, ask them to review the product and tell. So there's a better service capability as such. Provisioning of products and expositions as such, partial sales break. So all these aspects put together positions FTWs at a better position as compared to other logistics spaces, especially in the import-dominated locations. So as I told you, I had taken a sample case of one commodity, actually, telecom and electronics. I tried to understand what's the cost of storage, duty, everything put together for a traditional storage for a container full of electronics or telecom equipments, which includes computer hardwares, computer peripherals, electronics, telecom instruments. Typically, the cost is around 1.5 million INR. But when you put it on an FTWZ, you actually save a lot of money, as well as there is tangible and intangible benefits. So unquantifiable benefits like the value-added service that we talked about, the CKT assembly, the putting up, showing showrooms, etc. And quantifiable benefits like almost 20. So these locations, China and Southeast Asia, the major importers where we import these goods from, primarily around 23 to 38% is duties available. So anti-dumping, duty and subcategories are also there. So if we put it on SEZ, which save those, and we add on to the working capital savings on that, multiple heads like stamp duty, transportation, handling cost, empty container handling costs, and other strategic inputs as such, we can actually have a savings of almost 1 million INR per container, if we are talking about 1 TU for 4 months storage. So there are multiple assumptions which is going inside these. So just to give you a glimpse of the advantage that an FTWZ has, even in the current bottlenecks of policies. Certain policies, there are bottlenecks, there are certain concerns around that, but still it still remains one of the win-win proposition in the SEZ logistics storage point of view. So on the policy framework, some recent reviews which has been made very recently in the month of in fact 2018, where a chairman under the chairmanship of Mr. Baba Kalyani. What it brings into picture, I like to highlight some of these. A separate rule for manufacturing. Why is it happening? A separate rules for manufacturing and IT or services. These are two very inherently different. Why is this happening? inherently different sectors. So it needs to be catered in a separate way, and that's why it's very necessary. Why is it? To do this. Similarly, focus on employment, economics, and enclaves, which is three aspects as such. Statutory frameworks, putting all state and central level incentives and policies put together. Infrastructure status, just an example of infrastructure status which is being given to the logistics sector almost 1 year back, 1 or 2 years back. The interest which were available for long-term loans were at around 12 to 14% almost 4 years back. Now they have come down to 9.5 to 10%. So that's the advantage for having an infrastructure status. There are multiple challenges also in this segment in terms of large contiguous land. We talked about size, scale of the projects. So there are challenges around. Do we have 80,000 acres of land in one single location? Very difficult, given the land holding pattern in India, the ownership of land with multiple occupiers, and very difficult, but still we'll have to walk through it. Probably government has taken very significant steps. Probably one of the steps which is being considered non-contiguity of SEZs becomes viable. Similarly, that kind of aspects. Government supports in terms of last mile connectivity to the port and airport, so that SEZ right now is almost like a real estate space where you have a space, you have it develop on its own, you get all the incentives. But connecting it to the mainland, connecting it to the port is something which a developer cannot do. So that kind of aspects needs to be taken care of, and that's being also highlighted in the recent policy framework changes. Special preferences for port facilities as such, so that a mixed cargo can help and non-SEZ cargo can also help. So non-processing area is something which is being considered, can be considered as area which can be supporting facility for the processing areas as such. I think that's it from my end. I tried to keep it short, and I have a quick 2 minutes video also on this, on what JLL is about, because I haven't talked about Jones Lang LaSalle. So what we do is kind of service the entire life cycle of industrial locations, right from strategy to planning, investment, sales. Manufacturing, logistics, SEZs, ICDs, 3PL, from construction, monitoring, transactions, funding, supply chain consulting, one of the new segments that we have ventured into. 48-member teams across the country, supply chain consulting. Some of our last year's clients. We have been instrumental in working in manufacturing segment, getting set of plants, research paper, knowledge papers. Industrial maps, industrial and logistic maps of 8 cities where we put in all developers and all things together. A strong team spread across the country. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Day. I think it was a very exhaustive presentation covering a gamut of issues from logistics and right up to policies and how they impact SEZs. I think, thank you very much, sir. We'll now throw the floor open to discussions and questions.
Hi. I have a question to Mr. Bipin Menon. Sir, this is regarding the RCEP that is under discussion. There is some apprehension among the industry that this particular agreement is more playing to the strength of China, the manufacturing, and less to India, because India is morely a service-oriented economy. So our strengths are not being captured in this economy. And number two is because of the excess manufacturing capacity there, a lot of goods will start coming in at 0 or lower duties, which will undermine the domestic manufacturing revival and the Make in India. So how do you mean, I wanted just your opinion on this, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question is very pertinent because in RCEP, the three countries with whom we don't have an FTA are China, Australia, and New Zealand. And these are the three countries where we are really focusing on. I guess at the end of the day, RCEP has to be seen not only in terms of a single country, but also about the regional value chains in that particular region. I do understand that we have FTAs with ASEAN, we have FTAs with Japan and Korea. But these FTAs have not really leveraged the regional value chains, and this is the first opportunity that we really have to look at how we can actually source certain products from certain regions, do some value-added manufacturing, and then route it through the other regions of RCEP or export to them. China, I will very frankly admit, is a tough bilateral negotiation. We'll have to look at the best deal that we can get out of them, because at the end of the day, we don't have market access into those markets. And China, if you've seen, they have had very deep engagements with a number of countries, including ASEAN, Japan, not with Japan, but Korea, as well as Australia and New Zealand. So we definitely have to take into account the inputs from our stakeholders. But we also have to look at the fact that FTAs are a route for exports. And we are really getting badly hit, even in our exports to ASEAN, because the Chinese have greater, as I said, engagement with ASEAN, and they have market access on a number of products which we don't have currently with ASEAN. So yes, I do admit that this is going to be the toughest challenge in RCEP, and we're trying our best to take all inputs from our stakeholders and see the best we can do out of that. But I guess our industry will also have to have somewhat of an outward-looking orientation, because you have to look at exports in those regions, you have to look at investments in that region. Services is really a tough negotiation right now, but if you're able to arrive at a reasonable deal on goods, we should also be able to get a reasonable market access on services. So it's all linked with each other in a way, and we'll have to negotiate to our best efforts. But I guess our engagement with stakeholders is very important. I appreciate we got a lot of inputs from your organization, as well as some of the large players in this particular room. Thank you.
Any other questions for the panel?
Mr. Shazzad, I have a question. As an investor, if we want to do something in your country, especially for the textile and garments, where and how it can be done?
We are establishing some economic zone for particular business. Like that, I have mentioned that we have special economic zone for tourism. And as well as we have established some economic zone for textile also, some government, under government initiative, some G2G and some private. So, textile is our main export resource in our country. And, there are some tax holiday in export. And in addition, there are some additional incentive we have announced for textile factory established in economic zone. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose you can hear me now. Since you are from the logistics field, I'd like to ask you a question.
Please, sir.
Because India's logistics costs as a percentage of GDP are quoted to be the highest in the world, 13.5, 14%, as compared to 8 or 9% elsewhere. First of all, can you give some source which authenticates this figure, 13%, and when you go there, say 15%, somebody says 20%, what is the authentic figure? How do you arrive at it? How credible is it? And what exactly is being done to bring it to the world level? Because this is a question which is asked very often. Because everywhere else, figures are authenticated by some credible body. There's a CAS in Britain, they authenticate the figure. But in India, these figures are being mentioned without really any authentication. Could you please?
Thank you so much, sir, for the question. Yes, you're correct in terms of the data and the figures that we see are plagued by multiple sources where we see. But I think CII Institute of Logistics has given a credible number as such which we can rely on, and that talks about 13% of 13% as the percentage of GDP as logistic cost. And in terms of bringing it back to the global level, yes, I think there's a lot of things which is being taken care of. As we see the pie, the transportation pie, within the warehouse, we are seeing a lot of investments which are going in, not only just the transportation or the infrastructure which the government is definitely ensuring with Sagar Mala, Bharat Mala, and other projects as such. But private players, which has the kind of capability to mold their logistic supply chain networks, they are replanning. Then they are on the planning table right now to re-network their entire designs and supplies within the warehouse, supply operations as such being automated and all those things. The operations cost, which is primarily around the rest of the 50%, that is also being brought down. So for example, a grade A warehouse, the utilization is almost 2.5 times than a grade B warehouse. So all those utilization is now being brought into as more and more compliant, larger, globally compliant spaces are coming in the country as such. And you won't believe, one of the India right now has some of the properties which are comparable to the global standards in US, or Shanghai or places. And yes, we are looking into more automation or more advancements in the spaces as such, like multi-storage warehouses or logistics spaces, probably something to see in the future.
Yeah.
Right, so I think we have time for one more question. Okay. Can you make it brief, sir, please?
Yeah. My question is to Mohammad Shazzad Hassan. Sir, Bangladesh economy is doing little well, maybe about 5 to 7%. And India's economy is also doing well, but in the eastern sector, the economy of India and Bangladesh needs to be given a big boost. So is there any lurking thought on subject of developing any free zone in that corridor of Tripura or Northeast state, where things can work out in a more faster way, so that both the countries can develop business in a better sense?
Thank you, sir. As I have mentioned that we are establishing 2 economic zones. I am happy to inform you that one economic zone is very close to Meghalaya. It is very close to Chhatak economic zone. And we are planning to establish our market in 7 sisters of India. So in addition, we are planning to have another economic zone. We have raised this issue first time in Bangladesh. It is the border economic zone. Now we are working on border economic zone, and we hope within very short time we will announce some economic zone in border side within India. And I hope this will increase our long-term friendship and collaboration with India and Bangladesh. Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much to all our esteemed speakers. I think we've covered a gamut of issues in SEZs, right from the Chabar port to how it operates in Bangladesh, and then the free trade agreements, and of course logistics, very important aspects of SEZs, because the criticisms against SEZs is that does it really impact the economy of the surrounding region? So, and the biggest challenge I think is the backward and forward linkages between SEZs and the rest of the region, So I think that's something that we need to critically look at. What is the key policy challenge that we've faced in India towards the growth of SEZs, and how SEZs can contribute better to the economy of the region per se. So I think there's some food for thought. We can think about it and come back in our next event perhaps. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hariharan.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make a quick announcement that we will not be breaking for the tea right away. We'll continue with our next session as our state partners from Haryana state are here. But before we do that, I'd invite Ms. Vineeta Hariharan to felicitate all of our speakers. Mr. Mosttafa Shazzad. Mr. A. Bipin Menon. And Mr. Chandranath. I invite Exhibitions India Group Chairman, Mr. Prem Behel, to felicitate Ms. Vineeta Hariharan with a small token of our appreciation.